Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to a special Church History Nugget bonus edition. Coming from you from, I guess it's a home office edition too, because because of what's going on in Illinois right now, I've got to do this out of my home. But anyways, yeah, not to make light of actually the situation at all. I've actually planned on doing a bonus nugget, excuse me, way before anything turned out, or way before any of the quarantine hit. But one of the things that is, I was just kind of working through the last church history nugget. Again, we're talking about the age of the quote proper Catholic Church. Catholic meaning there was no other church. It's Catholic because there was really only one church. There weren't any divisions. There weren't any denominations. Talking about the age of the Catholic Church from 7 AD to around 312 AD. There was, in going through that, I realized there was something that I wanted to cover, but I didn't really have time in it. So, and it is actually the issue of church discipline. It's the issue of how does the church respond to like people that are in the community, but not really embracing the conviction. I know that's kind of a weird subject for me to talk about, but it's actually really important because we made choices back then and honestly impact us now with how we see church and how we do church. So I'm jumping in from that standpoint. Thanks everybody for jumping in. Hi, Angela. Hi, Patty. Thanks everybody for jumping in. I decided to do these a little earlier in the day because I feel like it kind of hits people's life group. Well, anyways, just jumping into it. The church at the beginning of it was really viewed as, and did, I'd say holiness very well. When the church started, it was under a lot of persecution, both from sometimes the government, Rome, over it, but most often if you became a Christian in those days, societally, it left a mark on you. You wouldn't be able to join most of the other things. You generally got kind of persecuted by pressure. People didn't know why you stopped making the sacrifices. Why aren't you going to the feasts or something like that? To become a Christian kind of in the most early periods, at 80 AD, 90 AD, 100 AD, when Christianity came into your village, maybe the first generation of Christian, a lot of those guys paid a pretty heavy price. And one of the things that I think that it's important to contribute is back then people were not Christians unless if you were really serious about it. The price that you would pay to join the community of faith, you wouldn't do it unless if you were really 100% committed. I mean, people would lose their jobs, people would get disowned by their families. If you're young, it could mean that you just simply wouldn't get married because, no one in your family or no one around you would be interested in you because of the social, stigma of removing yourself from what was most of common day society. So a lot of church was actually, the people that were there were 100% committed. And the early church really saw embracing a lifestyle of, I'd say, what we might even view as strict holiness as part of almost the evangelistic effort. They wanted to say to the world, look, we are truly very different people. We don't do the things that other society does. And it is the proof in the pudding that Jesus has really come. It is the proof in the pudding that not only have our sins been forgiven, but we've also totally been transformed too. And there's actually like a lot of accounts of people being converted through that and meeting the Christians. I mean, coming into a community where no one is doing any, I'd say popular sin or common sin. Everyone in the community together, no one is struggling with issues. Everyone is very devout in a lifestyle that is very holy. To a lot of people, that was the proof. I mean, we've actually got a lot of testimonies of people like actually jumping into Christianity because they just saw this community and just how devout to holiness they were, and how that really kind of proved to them what was going on. But as the church would move into a community, there would be an original, maybe first generation of pressure. As the second generation came in, maybe the pressure kind of eased off. People began to realize that the pressure, the cost that a lot of people first paid to become a Christian, the second wave didn't have to pay that cost. People maybe started to join the church for different reasons, maybe ones that weren't purely based on the, the conviction of Jesus Christ as Lord. Maybe some people, they didn't have a community and they saw one, so they joined one. So the church began to really have to grapple with the issue of, what do we do with people that are coming to our church and maybe even believe in Jesus, but aren't living into the lifestyle and the conviction? Now, a lot of people back then, they really did believe that Jesus forgave all of our sins, and it was the past and present and future sins. So what they were more looking at wasn't necessarily if God didn't forgive them, it's just how does this work in the community? What was really, I'd say, for lack of a better term, an intense holiness club with a strict moral code was starting to really kind of loosen, and it was becoming, the newer converts of kind of the second generation. They weren't as strict, and the church wanted to find a way to kind of deal with this, trying to keep a sense of community and not losing the conviction that they originally had. So there were a lot of kind of camps on the idea, and there was a lot of dialogue back and forth. One was kind of the strict club that really you couldn't do anything that bad or else you'd get kicked out. But most of the church embraced more of a moderate appeal. They said you were welcome to be a part of the church as long as you didn't commit any, quote, grievous sins, which they defined as, murder, sexual adultery, and of course the biggest one to the early church in that day would be denying Jesus, or what they called apostasy. So most of the church went on as those with those kind of concepts. And again, if you were out, it was kind of a big deal. Back then, people believed that it was Jesus that forgave your sins, and it was Jesus that got you into heaven, and it was Jesus that gave you the grace. But how you actually appropriated on your life was through the Lord's Supper. It was through actually communion. They saw it was the act of communion, was the act of receiving those things. If you were, quote, on the bad list and you were kind of kicked out of the church, it means that you wouldn't get to be able to receive those things, which was kind of the difference between salvation or not. It was a big deal to kind of get kicked out of the church back then. And it wasn't like there were other churches in the community. You couldn't just go from one to another. There was just one church back then. But something happened that was very interesting that really caused us to really think differently about this issue. And it actually happened with a Roman emperor. There was an emperor. Oh man, I should always Google these guys, how to pronounce these names before I get here. It's Decius. It's Decius. Well, anyways, he had a very short reign from 249 to 251, but he probably, this was one of the periods of the most intense persecution of the church. Remember, from Rome, from the top, there wasn't always persecution, but from communities, oftentimes there was. But this is one of the periods that Rome really cracked down. This guy did not like Christians whatsoever, and he viewed them as a threat. So what he did is he created, every community would do this, where they would create more or less a ceremony where everybody in the community had to be a part of it. And what would happen is you'd have to make sacrifices to the Roman gods. And if you did, you would actually get a certificate proving that you were there. And if you didn't, then you wouldn't get a certificate. So there would be these ceremonies to get these certificates. Then afterwards, people would follow up and check if you had a certificate or not. If you did, you were left alone. If you didn't, oftentimes you were locked in jail or even executed. It was a big deal. This guy was really trying to get rid of Christians, and he knew the one thing that Christians couldn't do was to make sacrifices to other gods. So in that period, there were a handful of super noble souls that endured imprisonment, death, and torture. This emperor knew he didn't want to make heroes out of this. So a lot of people that didn't have the certificate, he would drag them into prison. He would torture them for a long time, trying to get them to cave. A lot of people, he didn't want to just make martyrs, because he knew that would fuel the church. What he did is he did everything in his power to absolutely just totally cave it and make everybody sacrifice. Even people that did never cave, he discredit their testimony, saying that they did before they died. And the torture is what kind of killed them. but afterwards. But anyways, yeah, a handful of noble souls were able to withstand the persecution. Some were just tortured for a while and then let go. Keep in mind, the emperor actually didn't reign very long, and he was only on the throne for about 3 years until he was killed in a battle. So probably a lot of people started and were imprisoned, but eventually were let go. When this guy died and the next Roman emperor took over, he didn't really go this route. So a handful of people endured it. But honestly, most caved, and a lot of people caved. Some people were able to get the certificates I guess illegally. They went around it. A lot of people just sacrificed knowing what was coming. Maybe they knew other people in their community that tried to withstand but didn't. A handful of people were tortured for a while and then caved there. But what was important was, I mean, what the church was dealing with was maybe occasional one-off situations where somebody was on the naughty list. But now their churches begin to flood with people that, more or less apostatized in their eyes, denied the faith. But it was a different situation because it was something where it almost felt wrong to deny people like God in this situation. I mean, people were being tortured, people were being killed for this. It seemed almost barbaric to say no to people and not allow them to kind of join into the church. So this became a really hotbed issue. And it's actually from here that a lot of the philosophical outlook of church really was shaped kind of with this persecution that happened then. There was a handful of martyrs that and the church took a bunch of different schools of thought and actually how to deal with this. It's interesting. Some people in the church believed because of the martyrs and because these extraordinary people withstood this terrible, persecution and were tortured and died and denied the faith, because these people have done this, there was, through this and their exceptional courage, there was this treasury of merit, this spiritual treasury of merit that was accrued, because these people sacrificed so much that certain people could, because God had done, or because these people had done so much, the church could now grant people a special grace to those that caved. Because these people had done so much. There's a treasury of merit is what they call it. There is this extra grace that's now on top of the church that we were able to give over to people who did cave and did sacrifice. And that would kind of wipe away their sins, because some people did good. That adds enough into the account that they can kind of move it over. Other people were very intense about it. And you got to understand, I mean, this makes sense. A lot of these guys went for the church leaders first. Probably a lot of the church leaders, if they survived, were permanently disabled or disfigured because of this. They go through this and then they come to the church and they see these waves of people come in that more or less just, made the sacrifices, just caved right away. And to them, they wanted nothing to do with that. They figured these people had lost the mission, they'd failed. They're not going to be part of the community anymore. Other people said, hey, we have no business actually disciplining these people. It's really God who forgives sins. Really the best that we can do is just pray for people that God would accept them despite this act. But really what became the most common viewpoint after all of the discussion is that the church didn't want to just swing open its doors to anybody who'd done this, because they were afraid that sin would become more and more lenient. So the way that they kind of dealt with this was, hey, if you were tortured and you caved through torture, you're okay. It was your body that kind of gave out and not your spirit. But if you willingly kind of just bended your knee and made the sacrifices because of fear or whatever, we'll let you back, but you have to go through a period of mourning. You have to go through a period of penance, actually. And these people would actually do the sackcloth and ashes thing. What happened was there became almost a graduated kind of system of, if you've committed this sin, you need to do this to be part of our community. If you've done this, you've done this as part of our community. What became known and really a part of the church community, which would probably stay intact that way for a good 1,000+ years, was a system of penance. It was you can be part of our community, you can stay in church, but like there needs to be some way that you pay kind of your due to stay intact with the community. Again, it wasn't necessarily even about God as it was kind of about, well, it eventually moved into God, but originally people really did believe that God forgave the sins. It was more about how do you be part of the community. They view this as kind of a betrayal. How could you trust these people? We all were going for this thing and you decided to do this. How could we let you in without you, in a way, kind of owning up to what you did to the community? So I know to us, all of us as Protestants, actually that kind of grieves us, maybe kind of sneers to us. And the point isn't, the point of history and telling history isn't that we, say what we believe. It's to say what happened first, and then draw our conclusions. And in this period, this is kind of what people resulted to do. Now, I think it's very interesting, though, and philosophically, this is really, really important, because in that moment, we could have just shut doors to anyone who bended their knee to these other gods or worshipped or sinned, but we actually chose to include people. And philosophically, church from that point, and by and large, has been viewed this way, that church is open to people who fail once they become part of the church. Church is still open to people who make mistakes. Church isn't an elite club for holy people who can make it. Church is actually more a school for sinners, of people who can make mistakes. And back then, penance was kind of the way to stay good with the community. But philosophically, this really impacted us. The church became an open door to the community, even if you weren't that good at following kind of the convictions. And I would say, with the Protestant Reformation and what Martin Luther did, obviously that changed with the system of penance. But to this day, hopefully, churches are open to people that aren't following it the best, for people who, even in following Christianity, are still struggling with certain serious sins. We still see the church as something that should be open to those people. And maybe there's a need for discipline. Maybe there's a need for people needing to mature, or, people who have hurt the community in certain ways. There's a need for us to kind of find our way through that. But we've intentionally decided to keep our doors open to people that have sinned and hurt the community along the way. Well, anyways, I hope that blesses you guys. I hope it's interesting to think about. Through the persecutions and stuff like that, we had to grapple with some really hard issues, and it really does impact us. So God bless you guys. I hope you all are staying safe out there. You guys are all doing well out there. Love you guys and all that. Thanks for joining me. And yeah, I'll see you for the next one at 3 at the end, or sorry, around after 3:12. A very important event happened to the church that definitely changed the nature of how we do church and how the church is seen in society for a long time. And we will cover that in the next Church History Nugget. God bless you guys. Thanks for joining me on the journey.